Okay, so we have our screen here, and I did a quick layer of yellow ochre just to add a little color to here. We're going to be painting this scene, right, with our Pirates Cove. You guys should have got that in the email. And I originally did this on Zoom, and I hit record, and unfortunately, I recorded the wrong screen, so you couldn't see any of the instructions. So I'm doing another quick video that I'll send to you guys soon. And the colors we'll be using are, let's go here quick. We got yellow ochre. We got permanent green light. Burnt sienna. It's like a cadmium yellow. It says Hansa yellow, but cadmium yellow is good. Titanium white. Prussian blue. And cerulean blue, sky blue. Okay. Let's go back to our screen. All right. Let's out of focus. All right, here we go. Let's try this again. All right, guys. So we're going to sketch out the composition. It's good to have a ruler or some kind of straight edge. And I'll be using a Sharpie marker just so you can see the lines a little better. And this, from here to here, this is 14. Right? So if I go like this, right? At the center, that's 7. I make a little mark like this, and I'm gonna find my horizon line, right? I don't want that to be in the center. I want to have a little more sky than water. So about a third, which would be just less than 5, right? 5 times 3 is 15. So let's do 4 3/4. And then I'm going to bring this across, right, for my water line, make this nice and level. And all right. The next thing I want to do is I want to put in, there's a little bit of just some up close beach and some rocks. And for this one, right, so let's say we have about 5. It's about 3/4 of this foreground are going to be the rocks and the beach. So, you know, let's say 3.5. And this little line here is going to tell me where I'm going to make a little straight line. That's where my rocks and the pier, right, where those are all going to hang out. Right. So make a little, right, so that's just a little little note for me to know where to put my rocks and that kind of thing. And then I'm going to free draw this part. It's going to be just kind of like a wedge shape. Goes out like this. And like that maybe for my up close beach. If you want to, you can draw a few of these rocks. Right, there's a little clump of them here also. I got, there's a little post here. I think this is an old dock that maybe burned down a while ago, rotted away, sticking out of the water. And then, right above this line here, we're going to have those big sand dunes, right? And you know, I would compare this part here is going to be the widest part of your sand dune, the up close part. And I might compare that to, you know, maybe this space here. Maybe it's about half of this width. So I can measure, you know, maybe it's 1.75 to 2 inches. Or as long as I kind of go like this with my hands to kind of like eyeball it. And it's going to go like this. It's going to slope down, do like a little thing in the middle, and then it's going to start moving up again. But when it gets to here, it's not going to be as high as this part. So what I might do is, I'm not going to draw a straight line, but I'm going to make a little mark here. So that's going to tell me that I don't want to go higher. I want to go a little lower than this mark when I come up to here. So this part here, I'm starting, right? And it starts to move like this. And right, by the time it gets to like these little rocks here, kind of dips down a little bit. Then it does another one of these little guys. Right, and then it starts to move up a little bit. You know, just like that. It's a little lower than this part. And that's about all the sketching I'm going to do for now, because then we'll get into the paints. And we're going to make our sky. You know, just like some of the other classes, we'll be doing our combination of white and cerulean blue. And like in the picture, let's go to the screen again. All right. So we have our bluffs, and then we're going to do, if you notice, right, it's a very light blue, and it makes its way up to here. And then we could add the clouds too, if you like, or leave it a clear sky. And then the water does the same thing. It's this light blue, and it makes its way down to this darker blue, right, like a mirror image. So that's what I'm going to start with for my painting. Let's see. I don't know if you guys can hear, that's baby Maya in the background. Okay. So I'm using this brush again, flat brush, and I'm going to mix a little water. I'm taking my titanium white, mostly white, and I'm going to just, with the corner, this little edge here, I just scooped a little bit of blue. All right. Just to make a very pale blue. And I'm going to use this color, and I'm going to slowly add more blue to make it a little darker. All right. And so on here, what I like to do is, I'm going to actually start with kind of an outline. Right. And now I'm going to, just to kind of smooth it out, I'm just going to pull my brush across like that. So it's this light blue, and I'm going to start going a little darker. So I'm adding just a tiny bit more of this sky blue. Right, and you know, I like to just put a little bit here, see if it's a good match, or if it's too dark or anything. I can always add a little bit more white. Right, so I made that one there that's just a little bit lighter, that I think is closer. So I think it's good to, looks like there's little bits of dry paint in here. All right, and so from here to here, I want a smooth transition. Sorry, I know there's a couple little chunks of paint in here, because my paint was starting to dry a little bit, unfortunately. But if that does happen, you can just lift them up and apply a little more paint. So I got this. I'm going right off the page just to have a nice smooth color. Right, to make a nice smooth transition. And I'm going to go a little darker. When I get to the top, it's still going to be a light blue. It's not ever going to get as dark as just the straight cerulean blue. Right? So let's go with this a second. All right. So let's see, let's make that a little darker. And you can always add more water if it's right, not flowing enough on your page. Going across like this. And if you're doing clouds, you want this stuff to be a little wet. You have, maybe 5 minutes to kind of work into it before the paint starts to dry, because you want a little bit of the clouds to kind of mix in. So before this dries, I'm going to clean this brush, and I'm going to add just some straight white paint, and I'm going to make brush marks kind of like this, like little wispy, kind of far away, right, the cirrus clouds that are in my photograph. So let's see, more white. Right. Sometimes I'll go like this just to see if my brush is too drippy wet like that. I want it to be a little bit dry. Or a paper towel works good too. Right, so now I have that white paint on my brush, and I'm going to start up here. See, I'm just kind of dabbing the brush, and what's nice is, since this paint is still wet, it blends in, so they're very kind of soft clouds. And then I'm going to go like this. See those little marks? Right, they become just those little kind of wispy cirrus clouds. All right, something fun to kind of play around with. Okay, so we got our clouds. Now, while I have these colors still mixed, I'm going to make my water. I'm going to use the same brush again. It's always important to keep your brush very level, like the water, so that it looks realistic. That's also why I like to use a ruler to get this horizon waterline very, very level and straight, so I can use that as a guideline. So, and I'm going right over the stuff because I can see my drawing, my pen lines. So let's go with a little more, right, I'm just like I did with the sky, I'm going gradually darker.
Dad.
Hi, Jack.
Are you painting the beach? Are you painting Coral Beach?
This is Pirates Cove in Belterre. We were there a couple weeks ago, remember? There's Jackie.
Oh.
All right. So we're going like this, right? And
How about you make the water also? And the kids in the water also.
right. And it's important when you get this part right, you don't want the waves to kind of go like that, because then it'll look, it won't look natural like water. You want to keep your marks more like that. But if you do move your brush accidentally, just like I'm doing here, you can paint over it. So that's what's nice about acrylic paints. You can overlap, go opaque, different things like that, right? So, and I'm purposely leaving some of these little spots because I'm going to go with more color or different colors over that. So, right, we have our sky, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix some dark colors for these rocks and that kind of thing. And I'm going to switch my brushes too. So I will have these two, they're called round brushes, but like they're little pointy brushes. So I have a detail one, and I have, you know, kind of like a middle-sized brush. And I'm going to mix a few colors. So let's see, room on my palette. So my first color, I'm going to, I think with the Japanese maple, maybe we did something similar. We have our burnt sienna and cerulean blue, right? About equal parts. Gotta stir those together. Let's see. And that's looking a little more red than I want it to, so I'm going to add more blue to that. Right, so you kind of play around. Maybe there's slightly more blue if you want it to be darker, right? And I'm also going to mix I have that Prussian blue, the darker blue, so I'm going to mix the Prussian blue with the burnt sienna also. So that should make a nice, really very dark value. All right. I'm going to mix value with some yellow ochre also, and wash my brush quick. So I take some of this yellow ochre and burnt sienna. And we'll be using these for the rocks, for the wooden pier, for some of the pebbles on the beach, right? A few things. So you want to mix a good amount of these colors so you don't have to stop partway and mix more. I'm going to add a little bit of white to this color. Right? And as I mix, you know, you can just compare. That looks a little more pink than I want it to, so I'm going to add some more yellow ochre to it. Right, maybe just a little more white. So I have some of these different values here. That'll be good. And I'm going to actually start with that little brush for this one part. This brush here. And I'm going to take this dark value and I'm going to start with just the very dark parts of the rocks, the bottom, the right side of the rocks, the posts, you know, just where it's the dark stuff to start with. Right? And I'm not going to paint the whole thing. I'm just painting where I see it dark, right? Like this guy here has some dark there, and this one here. Right. And then let's see what else. This guy here. This one. And right here. Right. I'm also going to do the reflection of these rocks and posts that are, because these are in the water. And, you know, the main difference between painting the rock that's above the water and the reflection that's in the water is on the surface of the water, right? It's not a hard edge. It has kind of like a wavy pattern. So I'm going to do that exactly. I'm leaving these little gaps. right? So that you're seeing the wave. And let's see this post here. Right, just a little bit like that. Starts to take shape, and these guys are starting to get a little more character now. And next thing we'll do, actually I'll take some of that dark value again, and actually I'm going to paint these little clusters of faraway trees and shrubs, just so that I have that base. I'm going to put the lighter color, the lighter greens on top of that later. And the important thing about this stuff here is that if you look, right, they have an angle like this, like a slope, like my brush is doing. And then as we get to here, right, they start to kind of turn like this. What I'm doing with my, right, the brush, I'm just showing the angle that I'm going to be painting, right? So then these guys here, right, I'm just kind of following. And, right, the brush mark I'm doing, I'm kind of brushing down, I'm dabbing the brush a little bit. I added some water to the paint too, so it's a little more like ink, more flowy. Right. There's a couple of these little faraway ones. So these ones, the brush is a little dry now, so it gives this kind of texture of faraway little shrubs. Maybe there's a couple over here. All right. Now I'm going to continue with these rocks. I'm going to use that other value. So this one is the burnt sienna and the cerulean blue together. And let's see how that looks on top of here. All right. So I'm just filling in the rocks. I'm doing the most basic stuff first. The dark and kind of like middle color. And once those are in, I might look for, there's a little bit of that color in some of these posts. And now I'm going to take some of that lighter color,
Daddy.
the yellow ochre, and I'm just going to go just a little bit where there might be just a little bit of a lighter color on these rocks. Right. As they pop up a little bit. And now I'm going to switch to this brush, kind of like the middle-sized pointy brush. And I want to get these kind of pebbles here. So when I do that, I'm starting with this kind of lighter color. Just stuff like this. So the important thing is the marks I'm using, right? You want to think about perspective, right? If I do them all the same size up here, this whole area will just look kind of like polka dots, like flat. But if I make them smaller, by the time they get to this rock, they should be about half the size that they are here. And you can achieve that by just kind of overlapping a little bit. As it gets, the up close ones might have a couple that stick up, right, vertical. But as you get further away, everything should be, right, very horizontal. And this is going to be done in a few layers, so I'm just putting this one layer of this color. All right, I'm actually going to do a little in the water too, because if you look closely at the photograph, you can see through some of the water, the shallow parts of the water. All right, so I have this guy here, and I'm going to switch back to that little brush. And I'm going to continue with just different, I have on my palette, right, just all these colors next to each other. And I'm just going to play around a little bit. I'm taking a little bit of this color, and I'm going to look for, right, just little marks like this. Then I'll switch my color up. Right, so these become, right, from close up, they just look like a bunch of blotches of color. But when you step back a little bit, they start to turn into a rocky beach, which is kind of the texture that I'm going for. All right. It's always a good idea to step back a little bit as you're painting, just see if things look like they're in proportion. I'm going to mix just a tiny bit of some of my white and blue in here, so I get more of a kind of like a neutral color. A few of these rocks have that kind of color. They might be reflecting the sky a little bit also. There might be some rocks that are underwater that kind of have that bluish tone. All right. So starting to develop that stuff. Let's take some of that lighter color again. All right, so I'm just making little marks. And this step, you could keep it very simple, or you could easily spend half an hour just kind of playing around, getting the angles right, adding different layers of these colors. While I have some of this yellow ochre color that's right, just a little darker than that first layer of yellow ochre, I'm going to do just a little bit of shading and variety in the sand dunes, right? If you look at the photograph, there's a couple spots that are slightly darker, like over here, right, where it's like little paths where people walk up the dunes. So you know, just a little bit here and there. I just took a little bit of white too. You can kind of do highlights and darks all at the same time if you want. You know, just a little bit does a lot for like just some shading, some slight volume in your painting. And right, like earlier, right, I was going like this with the brush. You just want to remember as you get from right to left, the angles change. That'll do a lot to make this look realistic. Instead of just like straight lines up and down, we'll kind of flatten it. I also notice on the water, right, like over here, there's a little bit of reflection, a little bit darker colors on the water. So I'm going to mix some of that. I took a little bit of green, and I'm going to take some of this burnt sienna cerulean blue color, putting these guys together. All right, so it's kind of like a gray. It's not a bright green. It's like a very kind of like army green. And we got, right, like over here, there's just a couple parts. Right, and again, the key to making this water look realistic is just leaving those little breaks, letting the it feel like kind of like little ripples of water. And let's see, maybe there's a little bit over here. And I know I'm going kind of quick with these steps. You know, definitely feel free to pause the video or look over a step again. If you feel like you lost a step, of course, you can email me also if you have questions, guys. And while I have some of these greens out, I just took a little more of that Viridian green, and let's see, I got some of that permanent yellow green, permanent green, and I have some of this yellow. So I'm looking for that lighter color in the back of the faraway trees. Let's put a little bit of white too. Right, kind of like a spring green. What I might even do is take my brush and hold it up to my photograph to see if it's close. And as I look at it, I think I actually want to make this a little bit slightly gray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the opposite, which would be red, or this burnt sienna red right there. Just a little bit will get this just a little closer to the color that I want. Right, sometimes just a straight green will look too much like a candy green. So just doing that will help. And right, what I'm doing is I'm just lightly dabbing my brush, and I'm changing the angle a little bit so it feels like trees, right? A lot like the Japanese maple painting, but smaller. You just kind of change your angle, going around. And let's get, I'm gonna mix just a little bit of Prussian blue into this whole thing to get a darker value. And while the paint's still wet, I can get some nice variety, kind of like the clouds, right? But with the greens, I get some nice variety of these different things. And I have that underneath dark green color, so that helps these pop out a little bit, right? So we got some of these far away things. I might even put a little bit of this light green on top of some of these guys here. And if you look really close at your photograph, you're going to see a couple of people just walking up here. They look like little ants, and I want to put those in my painting. So to do that, I'm taking my smallest brush, and I'm actually going like this a little bit. Let's clean all that green off of there. And kind of sharpening it. And I'm going to take that dark color I used for the rocks. So I have just like a little bit on this brush, and I'm going to paint right here where I'm pointing. Just like two little tiny ant people. Right, so they're on there. They're walking along the bluff. And you know, there's more in the photograph. There's a boat here. There's you know, a couple different things going on. It's totally up to you if you want to add those in your painting to edit. While I have some of this darker color, I'm just going back into some of these shadows on the rock just to give it a little more grounding. So I think last thing is I'm going to mix a lighter blue, and I'm going to go on top of this a little bit so that there's just a little more variety in my option. All right, so right, I'm using those underneath yellow ochre brush strokes as my guide, right? Just to help it pop out a little bit. Right.